Greetings and welcome to our second session of the day. We hope you had a great week of learning. Thank you for joining us for our session entitled Clinical Trials, Why Your Participation Can Lead to Advancements in Kidney Disease. Over the next hour, we will provide an overview of clinical trials and explain why your participation is important. We will also have a live demonstration of how to find a trial using Antidote's website. There will also be time for a live Q&A segment during the last 15 minutes of the session. If you would like to ask our speakers a question, please submit using the chat box next to the video live stream. We will also try to answer as many questions as possible. Now let me introduce our speakers. Dr. Renika Lucas is a nephrologist and clinical researcher at Duke University. She conducted research on racial ethnic disparities in pregnancy, outcomes among individuals with SLE, focusing on how to accurately identify women at risk for adverse events. Her current research extends beyond the reproductive lifespan and focuses on addressing psychosocial issues that many patients with kidney disease face. We also have Dr. Richard Town, a PharmD graduate from the University of Buffalo School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. Before joining the Antidote team, he gained patient engagement experience in several settings, including primary care, managed care, hospital, and community pharmacy. He leads the annotation team at Antidote, which is responsible for structuring the IE criteria of currently available trials on clinicaltrials.gov to maximize patient matching through Antidote Match. In 2012, Curtis Mayfield was diagnosed with CKD. He started PD dialysis in 2014. His daughter tested to be a living donor, but was not a match. Her college sorority sister wanted to be tested and was a perfect match. In January 2016, Curtis received her kidney and a new lease on life. He's passionate about advocating and educating the community, bringing awareness of kidney disease and transplantation. Curtis is on the board of the board of directors of the National Kidney Foundation of Indiana and Home Daily Cores United. We will, excuse me, we'll have an awesome discussion today and many questions. Let's get started. Researchers and doctors are in a race to find new treatments as well as improve current treatments for people living with kidney disease or failure. One way the science and medical community can advance treatments is through clinical trials. Dr. Lucas, can you start the discussion off by providing an overview of clinical trials and explain why they're important?
Again, my name is Dr. Lucas, and as we're discussing today, clinical trials, it's very important that we first talk about clinical research. So clinical research pertains to studies that include human volunteers with the purpose of increasing medical knowledge on health and/or illness. And there are two main types of clinical studies that many researchers like myself participate in. And one is clinical trials, which is the focus of our talk today, which involves testing new interventions or treatments, and observational studies, which involves observations that are being collected, but there are no new treatments that are being tested. So as we think more about clinical trials, it's important that we note that it involves human volunteers, and we're testing the effects of new interventions on health outcomes. And in order to participate, your consent must be given. And these new treatments or interventions are not limited to, but include medications or drugs, additionally, diagnostic tests, procedures, devices, behavioral changes, or improvements in quality of life. And the primary objective of a clinical trial is to test that if the intervention or the new treatment is effective and/or safe. So, what are some benefits of clinical trials? So, it allows participants to have access to new treatments if they participate, and a lot of these treatments or resources may not be available to the public at that time. So you're getting this prior access to treatments and resources. Additionally, in many studies, it may require additional checkups where you're having the availability to get additional frequency of care from medical personnel as a result of participating in the study while the study is active. And the main purpose for many trials is to increase medical knowledge. And as a result of that, it can change the way that we practice medicine and provide therapies to patients. And so for many patients, while they find participating is beneficial to them, it's also benefit to future patients who may have a similar illness. And as a result of participating, you allow us to advance the cause of medicine and help future patients like yourself. So, what are some of the risks that are involved in participating in clinical trials? We know that there are side effects to new treatments, and sometimes the side effects can be serious, even resulting in hospitalization and additional testing that may need to take place. And even though we're testing new treatments, some of these new treatments may not be as effective as we thought that they would be. And even though you participate in a clinical trial, there's no guarantee that you will be a part of the group that receives the new treatment or the intervention arm, as we call it. Usually in clinical trials, there is a control arm or control group, and these individuals who are in the control group usually receive the standard of care or usual care. And individuals in the intervention or treatment group will receive the new treatment. But again, the risk is, you can be involved, but there is no guarantee that you would be assigned to that treatment group. So talking about clinical trials, it's very important to realize that this does not exist in a vacuum and that there is a scientific process that is going on. And usually it starts with a simple question that scientists may have. And before we test anything out, a new treatment out on patients or humans, a lot of the science will begin in a lab, in a research lab. And that's where a scientist asks a simple research question based on a problem that they've seen or based on prior studies that have been published. And what they'll do is after they have formulated their question, they will then do background research, looking at previous studies in journals to assess if anything has been done similar before. And once they've solidified that, they develop a hypothesis, which is basically that scientist's best guess as to what they think will happen if, in answering that question that they have, that scientific question, or their best guess that will happen when they want to test out their question. And usually with that testing that takes place, it's usually involving animals. And once they have effectively tested out a new treatment, they then will be able to say if their hypothesis was true, and then they publish their results, or they may have to go back to the drawing board. And so this scientific process takes a lot of time, and there are many years that go into this work prior to these very successful treatments that have been proven true in this laboratory are then gone on and done with clinical trials that involves human beings. And next, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the steps or phases involved in clinical trials. So the first phase of clinical trials is testing whether the treatment is safe and also potential side effects. And this usually involves a small group of people, anywhere from 20 to 80 individuals. And the second phase tests whether the treatment works and is also, again, monitoring side effects. And here we have a large group of individuals, about 100 to 300 individuals. And the third phase then tests the safety and effectiveness of the treatment. And for instance, if this were a drug or a medication study, this is where we would be able to get more information about appropriate drug dosing as well. And this will usually involve about 1,000 patients. And then the phase 4 usually happens after the Federal Drug Administration has gotten all the information from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and that new treatment is available to individuals widespread. If it's a drug, it's on the market. But phase 4 involves testing that drug or device for additional safety and also effectiveness in diverse patient populations. And this will usually involve thousands of participants. So what about diversity and inclusion in clinical trials? We know that all individuals like yourself are unique and have different experience. Even individuals who may have the same illness may have a different experience. And the same is true for different treatments that we may have available. We know that there are many factors that may influence the effectiveness of a particular treatment or intervention in terms of one's health outcome and basically your response to that particular treatment. And in the past, many clinical trials were limited to white men. In 1993, Congress, the US Congress, passed the National Institute of Health Revitalization Act. And what it did was sign into law appropriate guidelines for the inclusion of women and racial ethnic minorities in clinical research. So how are we doing in terms of minority participation? So this study looked at minority and also non-minority participation in clinical trials over the last 2 decades. And what they found is that even though white individuals make up about 72% of the general population based on US Census data, and this was back in 2010, they were overrepresented in clinical trials, almost 80%, versus individuals like the Latino population representing about 16% or so of the US population, but only 6% in clinical trials. And the same is true as Black individuals, about 12% of the US population, but about 10% in clinical trials over the last 2 decades. Additionally, for Asian and American Indian individuals, you can see that there's even less representation in clinical trials. So what about representation of women in clinical trials? So before we talk about that, we want to talk about some additional barriers to minority participation. So we know that from research that has been done previously that there's limited awareness in the terms of kidney disease among Black and Latino patient populations, and even less awareness in regards to the availability of clinical trials among these populations. Additionally, the reality is there are few clinical researchers, staff, and regulators who hail from underrepresented groups, and this also plays into additional barriers in minority population in turn. And historically, many Black and Latino patients have not even been asked to participate in clinical trials. And a lot of this may be due to bias, but also there's the harsh reality that there is not only mistrust in healthcare institutions, but also in research as well. But we also have to consider things like time constraints for many individuals that may be a barrier to participation in studies, and also accessibility, things like transportation to a study as well, that may hinder their participation. So now we're going to talk about the participation of women in clinical trials. So we know in many different medical specialties that women are not well represented in clinical trials. And I put your attention to this graph where women's inclusion is represented by the pink bars and the men in the blue bars. And in our field of nephrology or kidney disease is represented by that red bar. You can see that there is definitely a difference in participation of women versus men. Even in some of our more landmark studies in the last several years, you can see that about 41% of enrollment in clinical trials were women and only 59% were men. This is particularly important because as we think about all of the new medications that we're currently prescribing to many of our patients that have been shown to reduce the progression of kidney disease, women were not well represented in a lot of these landmark studies, which have really changed the way that we basically treat kidney disease. So it's also important too that we recognize that this disparity exists. So all in all, we can see that there's still a lot of work that we need to do in terms of increasing enrollment of women and racial and ethnic minorities into clinical trials because they have a tremendous benefit to our patients. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lucas. So tell us, in your opinion, why do you believe it's important for diversity within clinical trial research and the team?
Yes, yes, exactly. I think it's very important to have diversity because it informs our treatment options and to be able to get the data that we need to know if a treatment is effective, we need to have a diverse patient population that we're actually testing these treatment options to so that it can be available to the wide public.
Thank you. Curtis, can you help us out with understanding, why you chose to participate in a clinical trial and, what persuaded you to participate? And lastly, talk about any misconceptions you had kind of going into it.
Yes, actually, starting out, when I did mention it, and it was kind of due to a poster he had on his examination wall in the office there. It was kind of a selfish reason because I was still kind of going through the depression, anxiety effects of being diagnosed with kidney disease and looking for ways of either trying to stop it or slow it down because I wasn't looking towards going into dialysis or even thinking about transplant or anything like that. So for me, I was interested in seeing what a clinical trial can do, if it could slow down my disease, and also in the back end, seeing if it could be helpful to other people. So that's why I went ahead and talked with him. We had a very good discussion, or I should say discussions, before getting into the trial about what it was about, the effects that it could have on me. And when I felt good about it, that's when I went ahead and decided to get into a trial.
That's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. This one is for everyone on the panel in terms of clinical trials can lead to groundbreaking advancements in kidney disease. Although Blacks and Latino people are more likely to be diagnosed with kidney disease, they're often not in the forefront of clinical trial participation. Can everyone, kind of jump in with your thoughts on, the importance of diverse participants in clinical trials?
I can start for this one. Something that I find is really interesting, and this kind of shadows what Dr. Lucas said earlier. When Black and Hispanic patients are diagnosed with the disease at a higher rate, even if they're not represented in the clinical trials, the drug is going to be available for them later on. So if the trial is only looking at a very small population that might not represent the patients eventually receiving the drug, that could lead to a lot of things later on, such as, maybe the drug won't be as effective. Maybe there were side effects that weren't diagnosed. So it's so important that these patients are enrolled in the clinical trials so that they will eventually be getting the drug and can know that this drug was tested in people like that.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Quickly, I just want to piggyback off of Dr. Town and what he was saying, and what was in Dr. Lucas's presentation. People are unique and people are different. So the more you can get, the more people you can get in and test this to see how it's going to affect people, either due to race or gender or, how people are made up, it's going to be better. Also, you can go into and let them know we have a good diversity of people who have tried this trial so that especially communities of, we're a little bit not trusting in the medical profession. So this could really help with going on with trials.
Absolutely. Reducing hesitancy is important. Well, let me, in terms building on that, although there are many benefits of participating in clinical trials, as we know, there are often barriers. We hear about social determinants of health and so on. How can we, let's talk about removing those, and how do we encourage greater participation of women and minorities within clinical trials? And why do you think some of these barriers exist? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll start. So we know that, with structural racism, that there are, a lot of barriers in terms of, as you were mentioning, social determinants of health. So, if an individual has, limited access to healthcare, that can, that is a concern already. So they may not even know that they have kidney disease. So that will then be a barrier for them to even participate in a trial that's on, trying to treat kidney disease as well. So we have to acknowledge that. In addition, I think in terms of what can be done, I think we need to, the onus really is on researchers, but also in the companies that may be creating new medications or devices for our patients, and to establish community partnerships where we are going into underrepresented communities and fostering relationships so that trust, just like Curtis said, could be reinstated. And that individuals would feel comfortable enough to ask the questions that they have or the concerns to make that educated decision for themselves, whether they want to join a trial or not.
I was also wondering too about, for example, women in trials, and as you talk about social determinants of health and barriers, whether we like it or not, women have been and are the caregivers of our society. Would, having families and so on have an impact and be a barrier to participation in a trial? And what could be done about that?
Yeah, good question. So I think it is, again, based on the researchers as well, and the industries, to make trials accessible. And now we're at a phase where individuals are, we term it pragmatic trials. And really what we're trying to do is to take the burden off of trial participants. So that way we can enhance diversity in participants in studies. So we have to find creative ways, whether it's meeting people where they are for that initial study visit, or changing the times in which individuals can come in for study visits, depending on the nature of the study. And so that way we are meeting participants where they are, so that we are not creating an extra burden to them to participating.
Great. Before we move on, anyone else have anything that they'd like to add?
Yeah, I actually had something, and I really want to piggyback off what Dr. Lucas said. So when we traditionally look at inclusion and exclusion criteria of clinical trials, the criteria that determine the ideal characteristics of a patient to participate, the companies and researchers have traditionally looked at disease-related things, such as, oh, well, you need to have this stage of kidney disease, you need to have had it for this long, you need to not have these other diseases. And one of the things is that certain criteria might actually really limit the scope of the patients able to participate. And another thing, beyond just building inclusion exclusion criteria and maybe loosening those up a little bit to allow a more diverse set of patients in, there's also the consideration that Dr. Lucas said of study visit. If someone is working a full-time job and a study requires you to come in 5 to 6 times a week, that might prevent patients from making it to even getting to the trial site. And then beyond that, maybe a patient with the transportation, they might not even have transportation, even if they could go. So maybe that ride isn't there to take them to the site. And with those things considered, I guess my point is that it goes way beyond just the academic aspect of studying a drug and a disease. You have to start looking at the entire population of people and their certain circumstances.
Great. Curtis, anything before we move on?
They both basically took all my lines here. So
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
okay with what I disagree with what they both have said. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank all of you for the great discussion so far. If you're just joining us, thank you for being part of the Kidney Action Week. You're tuned into our session on clinical trials, why your participation can lead to advanced missing kidney disease session. We have a Q&A at the end of our time today, but wait to ask your questions. You can drop your comments in the box, and we'll try to get answers for you as quickly as possible. So please, in the chat box, put your questions and we'll work to address those before we end. So moving on to the panel, how is a patient safety prioritized in a clinical trial? What rights and safety measures are in place to protect patients? And I'll address that to Dr. Lucas, Dr. Town, and Curtis, you're more than welcome to jump in on that too.
Sure, I'll get started. So, there is a data safety and monitoring, drug safety and monitoring board for many clinical trials. And basically what it is, it's an oversight committee that's like mandatory for any trial that's in existence. And Dr. Town can also add on to this as well. But and so what they do is they will look at any adverse effects, also see responses, and they have, if there's laboratory data that is collected, let's say you're taking a medication, a new treatment, and there's blood work that needs to be done, they would have access to that. And if there's any sort of adverse effect, they can review what's happening. And there are times that these oversight committees may need to even, depending on if there are a lot of adverse or serious events that happen, even shut down a trial. So there is oversight when you are participating in a clinical trial. And usually this team or oversight committee really has, these are experts. So they're aware of the disease, they are aware of different conditions and side effects, and may be able to stop a trial if there really is serious side effects.
Great. I want to run, because we're kind of running a little bit behind it. I want to make sure that Dr. Town has time to go through, how to find and search and use the Antidote website. So if we want to move on to that, Dr. Town, are you ready to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, super.
So basically, this is the American Kidney Fund website. So for anyone that wants to know how to get to this, what is the clinical trial page? If you click the menu, click treatments, and click what is a clinical trial, you'll be redirected to this page. And there's a lot of great information here, curated by the American Kidney Fund. But what we're looking for is, if we scroll down through this, there's this little button that says match to clinical trials in 60 seconds. This is the Antidote tool. And if you click start here, you're going to be taken to a window that talks about, for what condition are you looking to find a clinical trial? And this is really, really expansive. This isn't just kidney disease. If there are other diseases that someone might have that they're interested in, they can type it in the box, and that's going to pull up its own clinical trial list. So for the sake of this, one of the conditions that is increasingly being looked at is lupus kidney disease, also known as lupus nephritis. So I'll start off, and we will type in systemic lupus erythematosus. If you just type lupus, that would have worked as well. And just to be clear, almost every condition is covered here. Each of them is distinct. The next question that you'll get is, for whom are you looking to find a trial? Myself or someone else? If you click myself, all the words will be in the you tense. If you click someone else, that will be in the they tense. And so a spouse, a child, or even a healthcare provider can fill out the journey using this one. We'll click myself. And if you look on the right, you'll see the total count of trials there. Right now, there are 251. It now asks, where are you looking to find a clinical trial? I'll do my home of Buffalo, New York. And now we have the option for how far are you willing to travel. And this is going to be great because it will allow you to choose how far you actually want to travel for a clinical trial, anywhere from just a small 10-mile radius, especially if you're in a big city, or in any radius, maybe if you live far away from care. We'll pick 60 miles for this. You can see there's 12 trials near me. And I'll take a very average lupus patient here. We'll do 45. We'll do female. And at the bottom, you can see, why are we asking this? We then have the option to sign up for personalized trial alerts. This is 100% skippable. You don't need to do this. This is more so if you want to receive updates when a potential clinical trial is a match for you. There's also a button here that allows you to share your information with the American Kidney Fund, and that would allow the American Kidney Fund to also contact you for clinical trial announcements and other educational resources. So right now we're going to skip that. We then have a question about what best describes you. This is also skippable, but we are increasingly seeing in a positive way that this is starting to tie into some inclusion-exclusion criteria. You will skip. Our next question is if you're currently pregnant or breastfeeding, and that's because we clicked female, we'll click no. Now you'll see the questions. This is where we start looking at the individual things that'll match you to a trial. So if anyone's ever been on clinicaltrials.gov, one of the key things here is that the language is sort of medical jargon. It's not designed for patients in as much as it's designed for healthcare providers. Our job at Antidote is we want to take that and make it accessible to patients. So these questions are in effect answering those inclusion-exclusion criteria and matching you behind the scenes. For the sake of this, let's say systemic lupus. We then have a question about has lupus affected your kidney function? We'll say yes for this trial. You can see that actually takes the trial out of the list. So that will help you have more of an actionable list of trials. We then ask about have patients received any of the following treatments, dialysis and kidney transplant? Say none of the above. We have a medication question. It's also important to know beyond the skip button, if people don't feel like providing a certain piece of information or honestly don't know the answer, they can click that. And then we have a final question about if patients have had any of the following conditions. So we'll say none of the above here. Now what this will do is it will take us to a results page. And the results page will give us a list of trials that have been identified as a preliminary fit for us. You can also sign up for the trial alerts again if you want to on this screen. There are a couple filters about the study phase and what type of study it is. But we'll go down and we'll see this drug, and we'll click this. And this page will give a lot more information on the specific trial. So we can see what the study is for, what the intervention being studied is, what the treatment is, what company or researcher is sponsoring it, how many people they're looking for, and the study ID for if you wanted to look it up on clinicaltrials.gov. You can see a couple more participation requirements about what genders this is open to, what ages, and if the trial accepts healthy volunteers. This is directly what's pulled from clinicaltrials.gov in case people wanted to take a more specific look at the criteria. And you can see this is a little bit of medical jargon, like I mentioned earlier. If patients know the answer to this, great. If not, we tried to do a little bit of the matching behind the scenes. But the ultimate matching will be determined by the study site. If there's something medical in nature, such as this UPCR score, we tend to allow that to be provided by the study site. So based on my answer of Buffalo, New York, the closest site to me would be in Toronto. So if I can choose this site, it's going to give me the ability to email myself the trial details, as long as I accept the privacy policy and understand all things related with that. Obviously, it's our goal to protect patient data as much as anyone. And that is the tool. So I guess I'll pass it back off to Burgess.
Well, we're not going to let you go that quickly because I wanted to be sure we got this in before we ran out of time. So I kind of flipped it around a little bit. Tell us a little about Antidote. Why did you decide to get into this space? What's the importance of it? I mean, we can kind of gather that, but rather have you sort of, fill the audience in on a little bit of background and how'd you get to, what you just showed us on the screen?
Well, really, so for me personally, I think that I wanted to do clinical trials because it's such a meaningful thing to drive diseases forward. So when I found about Antidote's mission, which centers around the fact, and this is a very shocking statistic, that 86% of clinical trials never get off the ground because we're not able to find enough participants for them. And that can be because not enough people knew about it. Healthcare providers might not have known about it. Or when people go to clinicaltrials.gov and they look at the entire list of trials available to them, they might get a little bit overwhelmed. So Antidote's mission was always to take that and make clinical trials more accessible for patients. And the way that we decided to really do that and help patient advocacy groups like the American Kidney Fund was with this tool known as Antidote Match. and making clinical trials much easier to filter for patients on their own without necessarily needing to consult their healthcare provider or medical records.
Well, and on that last point, in terms of not needing to consult their medical professional, there is a relationship there. There is a, physicians we think should be referring people or talking, within their sessions with patients about clinical trials, the good, the bad, the ugly, and so on. So how does Antidote and your, Antidote Match and all that kind of fit into that? Do we see physicians going through that with a patient? Do you recommend that? How's that working?
Oh, we 100% recommend that the physician answers it with the patient, especially because the physician will know a lot more about some of the granular details, and the physician might be able to answer more questions comfortably. The goal of Antidote is to give the patient more options, and especially to bring them to discuss to their doctor. Maybe there's a study that's not on the results page because the patient might have put an incorrect value in, but the provider knows about it and now knows the patient is interested in clinical research and can do some digging of their own for maybe a nearby site. Or maybe the healthcare provider themselves would be interested in becoming a research investigator and maybe looking at patients and how certain drugs work in them. So ultimately, Antidote's goal is to give patients more of a talking point with doctor rather than just giving patients to do all this on their own.
And just quickly, can you, without giving away any proprietary information, but how successful would you say that Antidote has been? How is this? I know I've talked to a few folks at Antidote. I know that your tool is available on a number of different sites and so on. So just give you a chance to do a sales pitch here. Talk to us about the impact that you are having in the marketplace and with consumers.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is just giving people, we've had a huge impact with getting people to research. And in fact, it was really interesting once the study site messaged us saying that there were so many people coming to them because of Antidote, that they were just shocked that so many people had actually found their small study. So it's really interesting because I think this just gives patient advocacy groups a tool to give their patients. And we've been super successful with just really, really getting awareness of clinical trials beyond all else, giving people options, being able to see that there are trials for people like them, especially for people with rare disease, with kidney disease. That's because.
Okay. How can we got a question that came in and kind of transitioning to the question phase. So, and this will be for everyone. Question is, due to cultural differences, Hispanic and Black patients may have distrust in the medical community. How can providers gain patient trust? Anyone have a?
I'll start. It's kind of what piggybacking off of what Lucas had said earlier. It's getting out into the community or working with community leaders to work with the people and getting in those communities to let them know that one, you're serious about what you're doing, you're willing to help educate the people along, and you're ready to dialogue with people and answer their questions and make it more of a relationship than just a medical person going in saying, try this. So it's building that relationship back that we definitely need in those communities.
Agreed. Yes, exactly. I think that's well stated, Curtis. And I also think it takes time. And I think sometimes as providers, we have to recognize that when trust has been broken, that happened over time, and it's going to take time to be able to build back trust. But we need to be persistent, as Curtis was saying, with really nurturing these relationships.
Great. So to throw this out to the group, the idea of a clinical trial, for most people who've never participated in one, is like this invisible this invisible thing. What is that? How much is involved in it? How much work is involved? Is there a cost involved in terms of participating? So can you kind of take us through, somebody who is maybe considering a clinical trial is able to get through the trust issue and say, okay, I'm interested in getting involved in this, but what am I really signing up for? And what does that mean? And are there other costs that, I may have to bear, whether they be, financial or time or any other things to participate?
I know that with me, as I have previously stated, I had a real good sit down, multiple discussions with my doctor at first. And at first, as he described it, I was able to ask questions. And then later on in our next visit, ask even more questions as I went home, thought about things, looked up some things. So it's getting that rapport back and forth and being able to ask any question. It could be, something, even off the wall. And that's kind of the way it was described. Just ask whatever it was. And I was able to do that. So that helped me along.
Are there any out-of-pocket costs that the person who participates would have to bear if they participate in a clinical trial? Dr. Town?
I'd say largely, for the most part, there are going to be trials that, if anything, it's going to be a lot of things that aren't an out-of-pocket cost. It's going to be care by a top quality medical team for free. Often, a lot of things are reimbursed, specifically for rare diseases and kidney diseases, where a lot of companies, and this is something, like Curtis said, that needs to be discussed with the doctor about if anything would come up. But more often than not, for these investigational studies, I would say it's the very rare occasion that there is an out-of-pocket cost. And if for anything, it wouldn't be for the treatment, it would be for the for travel or anything. But more often than not, the investigators are so eager to get these patients in their studies because there's such little awareness and such little interest that they're more than willing to accommodate travel nationwide and lodging and food and any other requirements. But this all comes down to asking those questions to the investigator and having a sit down. There are no dumb questions, and I can guarantee that any questions anyone has have been asked before.
Okay. Well, and taking that a little bit further, then, so you're basically saying, as a healthcare consumer, are you able to? And I use this word for lack of a better word, but you want to participate in a trial. Are you able to, in quotes, sort of negotiate with the trial sponsor in order to be able to have your needs met, so you can participate?
I think it's absolutely a necessity. I think that when you talk to these sponsors, there might be things available to you, and maybe the sponsor just didn't consider that they might have a huge amount of patients that would be willing to travel, and so on and so forth. And obviously, it's going to depend between maybe even on the site level or the investigator level. But I think that people really need to be their own healthcare advocates and raise these issues, because if you're a good fit for a clinical trial and something is preventing you from being able to participate in research, I am more than willing to bet that these sponsors will try to do everything they can to allow you to participate.
Any thoughts, Dr. Lucas? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that usually, patients are compensated as well. It may be like a gift card or in the form of some sort of, monetary compensation. A lot of times will happen for involvement in trials.
What are your thoughts on this notion of decentralized trials? For example, rural communities, there's been a lot of discussion that they don't have the same opportunity because they're not near any of the, large, research, facilities and so on, nor, can people, travel that distance. So any thoughts relative to that? Is that something that you think has value? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think it does, just because it would increase our access to individuals who may, we didn't really talk a lot about rural communities today, but that's also another concern. And so this would allow those individuals to participate. And again, like that will then inform all of our, plans for the future in terms of treatment effectiveness. So that would be very helpful if patients are able to sign in if there's a decentralized study.
And to bring up one of my earlier comments about how some patients might have difficulty traveling to the site, with a decentralized model, patients are going to be able to have not just maybe the study intervention sent to them, but they also might be able to have a telehealth visit with the investigator. There might be like a mobile lab team that's able to come to the home and draw labs, especially in something like kidney disease where there needs to be a lot of lab work. That can add up to a lot of travel. So having a
Mhm.
decentralized model is just massive for patients who otherwise would look at a trial, know they're a good fit, but simply not be able to participate due to their work schedule or travel situation.
Right. And so, what's the relationship? So you decide someone decides that they want to be in and participate in a clinical trial. What's the relationship of your nephrologist to the trial? How involved or not involved are they in the process?
Yeah, so I think it would depend on the particular study. I think more and more you're seeing these sort of investigator-initiated studies where we may, as you know, I work at Duke, and sometimes we may have some investigators who work at Duke, and we're also enrolling our patients as well in studies. So in that situations, it's a little bit different. But there are going to be cases where, as I believe Dr. Town referred to, where you may be going off to somewhere else. And it's very important when that is the case, when you're involved in a study that may not be pertain to your particular medical center, that your nephrologist is informed. And usually a lot of clinical research teams are pretty good at communicating to that patient's local nephrologist any additional lab work that may have been done and informing them about certain things.
If your
But
current
it will depend on the study.
Okay, if your current medications are working, and I use this word, loosely, fine, and everything seems to be okay, tell me what you think that the thought process is for somebody who, might want to or be looking at clinical trials. Should they just stay the course? What happens? Because obviously there may be fear of, gee, everything is okay right now. If I do this clinical trial, could things deteriorate or whatever happens? Can you allay someone's fears about participating in a trial under those circumstances?
I think one of the things I want to start off with is that interventional trials aren't the only option. There's also observational studies for people who might be on a drug. And those studies are more so looking at, maybe the long-term effects of a drug that a patient might be on or other factors. And with that way, there's no interfering with the background therapy. And beyond that, if the patient does participate in an interventional trial, increasingly we're seeing trials that are looking at additional medications on top of standard of care. So you get to keep everything the same in the background, but they might be adding one more agent to see if things work even better. And obviously, Dr. Lucas talked earlier, if anything happens where there might be a side effect or something that, is otherwise looked upon as a concern by the safety monitoring board, the study will stop giving you the drug that is causing those side effects. But that information is very important for other patients.
Right. So we're kind of getting, closer to, finishing up the session. And, Dr. Lucas, is there anything that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think, as a result of everything that you've heard today, if there's one thing that you should take away, I would really let you to know that it's really important that you understand that we need to have diverse groups of people involved in clinical trials. Not only is this helpful for information gathering to assess the effectiveness of a therapy, but it will then go on to benefit the larger patients and medical community so that we can effectively treat individuals with kidney disease.
Let me follow on with that because we did get a question in terms of incentivizing participation, and it's I haven't really talked about it, but it's something that really kind of bugs me in terms of incenting for participation in clinical trials. There's a lot of talk that if you over incent, is that going to be coercive? Are you going to get people to do things that they shouldn't do that's not in their best interest? The other side of the coin that I like to say is, well, people are putting themselves, I'll say on the line, but they're willing to use their bodies for research. Shouldn't they get some kind of compensation more than just, an Amazon $50 gift card or $100 or even $500 card? What's participation in a trial worth when a sponsor and pharmaceutical companies spending millions of dollars for a trial? So just real quick, what are your all your thoughts on greater incentives for trials participation?
I think it's key. I mean, I think it's a drop in the bucket. I don't think that a trial should lead with an incentive. I don't think that you should say, oh, well, you're going to get paid X, Y, and Z. But I do think for a lot of people who are weighing their options about how many visits a study might prescribe, I believe the earlier comment about my medications are working, quote unquote, fine. I think that if we're going to continue to see 86% of clinical trials remain to be unfilled and unenrolled and potentially life-changing drugs never hitting the market, I think that incentivization is so key.
By the way, Dr. Town, that 86%, unfilled, is that, with what you guys are doing at Antidote, have you been able to move the dial on that somewhat?
I think it's really tough because we reference an old statistic. I believe, though, that we see a lot of trials that we will host on our platform, and eventually they'll either fill or they'll say this trial wasn't deemed feasible and we closed due to lack of interest. We don't have a lot of visibility on how much that changed on a macro scale, but I do like to believe that just by raising awareness, we've helped move the needle even just a little bit and gotten a couple people in clinical trials and ideally saved at least, a few lives.
And Curtis, being a participant, what do you think about incentives?
Incentives can be a real catcher at first. I don't think you should do it just for the incentive, and don't think of how much you're getting. It's more so for the betterment of your health and for other patients' health. But it does help, especially for people who do have to travel, if you're helping in that type of way. But it shouldn't be the top priority for you getting into a clinical trial.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Town, last question for you in terms of what's on the horizon for Antidote in terms of how will you be improving Antidote Match, from what you've learned so far? Anything new, things coming down the pike that you would like to share with people?
Well, one of the things I'm really excited to share about what we're doing at Antidote is we are building out our patient journeys. An example of the one is we have these things that we refer to as curated journeys, where we really control the flow. We talk to subject matter experts, and we build out the best possible patient experience, like with that lupus trial. The rest of our match experiences are based on the most common criteria, but we are increasingly seeing subject matter experts being willing to work with Antidote, being willing to share our tool with their community, and just really getting people to a more granular, a more specific trial match. So I'm really excited as we continue to expand that to other conditions. Coming up for American Kidney Fund, we do have a trial curated journey coming for a condition known as IgA nephropathy. For anyone in the audience or listening that might know of that, we're really excited to roll that out soon. And yeah, just really building out more and more conditions, hopefully helping people match the trials.
Great, thank you. And Curtis, we did have a quick question come in terms of, did you look at other, what other resources to help you decide that you wanted to participate in a trial?
At first, there weren't a whole lot back in the time that I was diagnosed and looking at trials to really look at. But now with things out like what's going on with the AKF website, there are a lot of other things out on the web now that gives you the ability to look at different trials. So I would suggest going out, doing some education, and bringing it back to your nephrologist to see if they're a good fit for you. So.
Well, I want to thank all of our speakers, presenters, panelists, if you will, today for being here. As we wrap up this session, I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways. Be sure to check in with the speakers. And Dr. Town, I think and Dr. Lucas, you really have gone over some really great information and had some great, I'll call it closing comments. So is there one message that you'd like to, go around the room here that each of you would like to leave with our audience?
I would say, I think Antidote is great too, and I know Dr. Town will also promote it, but I will say that in addition to that, have discussions with your healthcare team as well.
I really would like to.
Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. All right. Well, so what I would like to say is I really do want to piggyback what Dr. Lucas just said. Antidote is great, but if people want to find trials through clinicaltrials.gov or a conversation with their healthcare professional, I think that's the most important thing at all. Antidote isn't there to have a monopoly on clinical trial matching. We just want to increase awareness, which is why our tool is available for free. There's no money made off of it, so on and so forth. We just want people to know about clinical trials.
Thank you. Curtis?
I would just say to my fellow people who are affected by kidney disease, look into clinical trials if you can. You never know what it can do for you. It could be a benefit for you. It can be a benefit for other people. So please look into it. Again, look into this Antidote site and talk with your physicians and your nephrologist about it.
Well, with that, I would like to thank Dr. Lucas, Dr. Town, and Mr. Warfield, Curtis, for taking time to share your thoughts and ideas and expertise today with our audience. Hearing from real people out there, in the field, if you will, is so important. With that said, it's time to close out our session. I'd love to give a huge thank to the audience as well for tuning into the sessions throughout the week. We hope you had a great time learning and engaging with us. Today's the last day of the Kidney Action Week 2023, but we still have more content for you today. Stay tuned for a great session that will discuss the advancements in kidney disease treatments at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. With that, again, thank you all for your participation and your support.